Tsiga.
Welcome to another edition of Real Talk, Straight Talk, surrounded by the ladies. Before we get into the conversation, I'm going to say hi to Mystery first. I know I looked at Angel, but I'm going to say hi to Mystery first. Hi, Mystery. Welcome to Real Talk.
Hi, Colin. Thank you for having me.
Love having you here. Angel, it's been a minute.
It's been a while.
We're going to get to you in a minute. But before we go any further, let me say a very special shout out to all our supporters and sponsors. Got to send a shout out to the Wien Community Center, Pastor T doing her thing. Up Like 7 Barbershop with Put in the crew, Paranite Bar and Grill with Jiggy and the crew. Gonna take it out of town, go to Rhythm Movements Community Association in Ottawa, come up to Hamilton with Soul Kitchen Radio, coming right back to London. Gotta say a shout out to Stephen and Deb over at Pride. Can't forget RBC,
yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Can I ever forget RBC? No, I can't. And now back to us. So, like I said, our guest today is Mystery Furtado. Actually, I'm going to ask you about your name. That's one of the things I got to get to, right? Mystery Furtado, she is a mom, entrepreneur, award winner, and the list goes on. If you're on any kind of social media, you'll see her there. I always see posts for Type Diabeat It, which we're going to talk about. And, of course, my sometimes co-host, when she doesn't abandon me, is Angel.
How are you doing today, Colin?
Oh, I'm surrounded by ladies, so I'm good.
Okay. Good.
Are you good?
I'm great. I'm doing great.
Mystery.
Yes.
This conversation is all about you. This is where we get to find out who you are and all the things that you do. And Angel is going to talk to you about the more serious stuff. And I get to talk to you about not just the fun stuff, but all the other stuff that gets into making of the serious stuff.
Okay.
Name of your company.
Name of my company, Type Diabeat It.
Give me a brief description about what type diabetes does.
In a nutshell, we support the Black community living with diabetes, but a real focus on culture because culture is health. So how does culture play into our diabetes care, management, and overall prevention?
Nice. The last few weeks we've been talking about mental health, so we're kind of still on the same health tip. This time we're taking it in a more physical sense. Diabetes is something that truly affects the Black communities. So, like I said, we're glad to have you here to give us a little insight. And I'm gonna let Miss Angel start it off and get into yes. I'm gonna be a little bit. What did they say? Chivalry ain't dead. Well, I'm not about to kill it. So.
Okay, I respect that. Well, thank you, Colin. Well, awesome. I'm so glad to have you here, Mystery. It's always a pleasure. And digging into the deep stuff, like the condition itself. I know you said your company name is Diabeat
It.
It, which is amazing. It's a nice play on words.
Yes.
It's an amazing. How did that come about?
So when we talk about, the Black community, predominantly we're talking about type 2 diabetes, right? So you talk about type 1, type 2, gestational diabetes, right? There's all these types, but we want to be part of beating it. So I came up with Type Diabeat It, right? So that's where the inspiration basically came from.
Awesome. So I did a little research because I'm not familiar with a lot of things. I know just because there's families, friends have it, and some have to take the insulin shot, some have to take pills and regulate it in so many different ways. So during my research, I did find out that 60% of Black people, this is according to the association, the American Diabetic Association, that 60% of Black people are prone to getting it. So that is really concerning. And also with the information that I gathered, it was mostly because people are not educated enough on the condition. Like I will take, for instance, myself. When it comes to certain things about my body, I'm going to feel a tingle in my leg. I'm just going to brush it off as, oh, maybe it's just a tingle. I pinched a nerve wearing some tight pants or something, and then leave it at that. Or if I get blurry eyes, I'll probably just think, oh, well, maybe my vision is. But then we never rule it off as, okay, maybe I have diabetes. It's always something else that you push to. So when it comes to educating yourselves, especially the Black community, I love what you're doing, because it seems with your program, you do teach a lot about how to find out how to know that you have it. Okay, so the biggest thing for me was understanding diabetes itself. So you've already mentioned some of the types, which is good, and the one that is common in our community is type 2.
Yes.
So can we just touch on that?
So I'd like to start where you spoke about, the educational piece, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it's just a lack of education, right? There is a ripple effect when we talk about health, right? Yeah. So for instance, let's look at us. We migrate to a different country, right? Yeah. We have more barriers that impede us from potentially accessing that education, right? So when we talk about education, it really depends where you are in the world. So I could say for maybe those in the Caribbean, maybe, in more developing countries, there could be a lack of educational component, and similarly here. But I find that we have to understand, one, as a community, we have a non-trusting relationship with the healthcare system. Okay, so you spoke about it already. If I feel a tingle, I won't go to the doctor. No. That's culture. Yeah. That is embedded in our DNA. We're gonna go get some bush medicine. We're gonna rub something on our, because it's cultural, and it's not our fault, because the healthcare system, and no offense, because in Canada we do pretty okay, right? Yeah. So it's not to attack any nurse or any doctor, but the reality is there is racism in health. okay?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're a person of color, you might not get the same treatment as your counterparts. So that in itself is a whole nother conversation when we talk about diabetes, right? And go ahead.
And I'm gonna, you know what, I'm gonna touch on what you said, because I met you like 2 years ago, and that was one of the first conversations we got into because of you trying to be a nurse in Canada. So I'm gonna touch on that a little bit later. But I also wanna add something that Angel said, because it's only when I started to do research I really understood that how many different types of diabetes. So there's that educational aspect where I think I'm gonna back her up a little bit and say, yes, there's so much that we don't know. Because like I said, until I actually looked, when I think diabetes, and I think when a lot of people think diabetes, it's just diabetes, not there's so many different types.
There is. So for instance, there's type 1, that is genetic. So there's not exactly a pathophysiology or a cause or something you can do. Your body's just not producing insulin, and you can't really say you can do X, Y, and Z. It's hereditary, and when you end up on it, you need insulin, and it's not just what you eat. It's just basically you've developed type 1, right? It tends to be diagnosed like in your high school years. So it's usually called juvenile diabetes. Yeah. Gestational is also very common in our community for Black women, and that's when you're pregnant. So typically they do a screening at a couple months of gestation to see if your blood sugar is high. Most people are able to not have gestational diabetes after giving birth, but then some people end up with type 2 after giving birth. And this is not only for women of color, but also indigenous community, some of the Indian community, Asian communities as well. And type 2 is your lifestyle, right? Yes, genetically we're predisposed, and that's where my work focuses on, is digging into our culture and understanding why we eat the way we eat, right? Where is, the bulking up of the carbs coming from? So I do a lot of like Afro heritage food pyramid to take us back to how we really used to eat. And we have to understand that for the rest of us in the diaspora, our food's been influenced by slavery and westernization, right? So as slaves, they gave us more carbs to keep us full longer. And then they gave us the reject parts of the meat. So I know we all love oxtail and we all pigtail and all these different tails, but the reality is that's not how we ate before slavery, right? And we have to understand that as we age and we don't walk as much. When was the last time you walked to the store? Well, not you. You're a bad example.
Yeah, I'm a bad.
Because you walk everywhere, so that doesn't count. He doesn't count. But Angel, when was the last time you walked to the grocery store?
Never.
Exactly, right? But then we're eating the same as if though we were 18.
Yeah.
So my sons can handle the rice, right? Because they're running everywhere. They don't sit still, but we're driving.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't eat as much because your input has to match your output type of thing. That's like a fundamental principle. Your input has to match your output. So like that's one, right?
Wow. Thank God I can take everybody's rice. I walk enough so I can have rice for you, and a whole bunch of other people.
And that is true. Like if you are burning it, you're able to consume it, right? So that's one.
Yeah.
Two, when we're talking about type 2 in our community, we cannot isolate one from the other.
Yeah.
We eat because it's emotional, we eat because it's cultural, we eat because it's social, we eat because we're stressed, we eat because we're in our cars 24/7, going to work, pick up the kids. So we don't have the greatest relationship with food, and especially in our community because of other barriers in the system, like the type of jobs that we're more prone to get, the lack of insurance. You see higher numbers in our community. That's right? So if there's one thing when we talk about type 2, even before we get into the science, the technicality of it, first principle, whatever you put in has to match your energy, okay? That is like core 101 life advice right now, okay? When you think about food, think of your energy level, right? So if you're eating 3 pot spoons of rice, because in our community, right, the rice takes up a big part, which is funny because rice for us in the diaspora was something that was brought to us, again, during slavery and westernization. There's only a few countries in Africa, like Senegal, more like in the East, that actually made rice. And those people were transported as slaves to the Americas to cultivate rice in America. But for us in the diaspora, like, the Caribbean, Latin America, you can date back when these countries start to make rice, because our foods were ground food.
Yes.
The cassavas, the plantain, also some of it brought over, but we ate food from the ground, right?
And the funniest thing is in Jamaica, we talk a lot about ground provision.
Yes.
Right? We have so many times that where the said thing is just to have ground provision. No rice, just ground provision and whatever meat that you have, right? So with it being subconscious, we actually, are setting a trend that we didn't really sit down and say, well, rice was only introduced at this time, but we're still big on ground provision.
Yes.
I know a lot of people, like every Sunday they make sure that they load up on their ground provision.
Nice.
And soup and all that kind of stuff.
And because that's how we ate. That is normal to us, right? But then they brought in rice, and then all of a sudden we became the culture that eats the most rice. Right? So when they think of, the Black community, it's like all we do is rice and like all these exotic meats, but that is like severely inaccurate. Like grains, Africa is one of the continents that has the most grains.
Oh, yeah.
Dates back to ancient Egypt times. They found it in the Egyptian tombs, right? Like grains, Africa, a lot of different variation of grains, because rice was not a main staple. Yes, it was a whole grain because they cultivated it, but they had different variations of rice, right? So not just the white rice that we know, but actually other forms like the black rice and other types of rice that are considered sacred, that comes from grass, and it wasn't like bleached or heavily refined. They ate it as a whole grain, so it was coarse. So that's also a key difference, right? And again, when we talk about diabetes and culture, I like to give the visual of the plate, right? So if you think of your plate, and I'm not stomping on anybody's toes, I think of the plate, it's the circle, and visually I want you to divide this plate in two, okay? So when you divide it in half, on the half that we normally have rice, a whole mountain of rice, and then on the other side we typically have meat, and like 2 pieces of lettuce and a cucumber, right? That's our.
I actually love my salad. So,
right?
So.
Colin, you don't count, okay?
Yeah. All I'm hearing.
You're not this is not because I know you and I know how much he walks, and he purposely chooses to walk, which is a great. I would recommend it as self-induced walking for your own health. Like that's great, but for the rest of us who's not walking all over London. Our plates tend to look a little bit different. Yeah. So what it's supposed to look like is the half that we would have rice, we want to put vegetables in there, okay? All veg. On the other half, you divide it in two, right? So a part of that should be your proteins and the other part should be your carbs. And that is a very simple visual, whether you are pre-diabetic, diabetic, trying to prevent, is what our food plate should look like.
Yeah, that's
right?
just standard. That's what it should be, regardless of whether you're sick, healthy or not.
That is a great visual for all of us to be able to incorporate, right? So a lot of the work that I do is very much around cultural competency, having these difficult conversations, and also a lot of empowerment. Right? Because we cannot be disconnected from our food. Because again, health is not isolated from your mental health, your emotional health, your physical health. They're not. Health is very much holistic as well as culture. And your culture dictates whether you go to the hospital, which we don't. That's never our first answer, right? We have a grandma or an auntie or a mom who was like, get some ginger, get some grass in the yard, and that is okay as well. But at the same time, we also need to understand that getting the health checkups that we may need is also very important.
Okay. So that also begs the question now, like considering that type 2 is prevalent in our community, when is the best time to get tested? And what kind of tests are available for that? So
best time, that's a very good question. Yeah. I'll give you an example, and not to say that.
Let's say if it's genetically, like if you know your family has it, if you've got a background.
So there's a test called HbA1c, and that looks at the lifespan of your red blood cell, which is about 3 months, okay? So you're able to get that test and you can't cheat. Because what happens for a lot of diabetics, whenever they have to go in for like the fasting blood sugar, which tests 8 hours, they tend to do well.
Yeah.
They don't eat anything that's going to affect their sugar. So when they go check up, they could get a false reading. But what I strongly advise your community to ask your doctors for is a HbA1c test. And that is going to tell you your sugar activities 3 months prior to the date of you taking it. In terms of age, I think from my experience doing free HbA1c testing for the Black community, and this is, you know, locally and internationally, I think by the age of 25, you should check where your numbers are.
Okay.
Just because culture has us eating a certain way. So I've had someone who is less than 25, looks healthy, active, HbA1c comes back, diabetic.
I'm so far behind when you say start at 25.
Yeah, but
It's not recommended. Like normally you want to wait until you're 30, 35.
Yeah.
But from my experience, it's not bad to find out. It is accessible. It's not like, you know, having that test. Like for instance, I'm from Belize.
Yeah.
That test is not available. It's expensive. It is available, but it's very expensive. So most people don't get it tested. So I'm a part of a program that offers it for free once a year. And we go around to a few places in the country and we offer it for free. In Canada, that barrier is not an issue.
Yeah.
So if you have a family doctor, it doesn't hurt to know because of how we eat.
Yeah.
So diabetes is dangerous and they call it a silent killer because you can have high blood sugar and just not know.
And here's the thing,
Right?
I've never heard of the test either, right?
Yeah.
That is, once again, this is the lack of knowledge
yeah,
part.
and the only reason I asked too is because I know some children can. It's not just for adults, right? So like. Obesity can cause that for you to have, like, okay, of course, eating. So there's a lot of obese kids. So they can get diabetes in their young age too, and teenagers as well. So do you recommend, like, I'm just wondering, like, if you see that maybe your child is obese, is it also a good time to also kind of think, okay, let me go check on that?
For children, I think it'd be a call for the parents to decide.
Yeah.
Because when they're younger, there's more time to get them into a healthy eating
Yeah.
habit and
Develop.
exercise,
Yep.
Yeah.
right? They're still young.
Yeah.
And remember, high blood sugar is actually a defense mechanism for your body.
Yeah.
So when you're stressed out, you actually have high blood
blood.
sugar. When you have cold, a regular common cold, your sugar levels is high. And stress is also very much a factor that contributes to diabetes, whether we want to think of it or not. Because when you're stressed out, your body cannot tell the difference between a real stressor, like somebody's bugging me, or something in your head.
Okay.
So if you go to work and you don't like your coworker, your body is gonna have, you know, constricted gastric fluids, your muscles are gonna contract, your stomach is gonna retain, even up to constipation. So during that time, your body doesn't know what to do with glycogen, and all of that contributes over a long period of time to include, you know, increasing why someone could also develop type 2 diabetes.
You touched on something where we actually, but let me backtrack. You touched on something about exercise, and I want to bring it into today's society.
Yeah.
You know, when you say to your parents, get your kids out to go exercise, and it's so hard because nowadays, you know, a lot of kids, mine included, that phone is the thing that everybody pays attention to, right?
Yes.
How important is it to try to influence your parents to get their kids out? How important is it to get the kids themselves and say, hey, you got to put down here for 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, something, get out, exercise?
So we have to remember that kids don't always do what you tell them. They kind of do what they see,
True.
right? So I try to target the family unit and not just focus on like the parents or the child, right?
Yeah.
If collectively you're able to incorporate workout as an entire unit, that is the best approach to health. Because you can tell your child workout, but if he does not see you, the parents, give that example, which it's hard because we have jobs, we're going to school, we have multiple jobs, right? So it's also hard for the parents. So my advice when I talk to parents in our sessions is start with 5 minutes, right? Could be 5 minutes around the yard, 5-minute jumping jacks, play a song for 3 minutes and dance. And you just try to incorporate by 5 minutes every week. And it takes 21 days to form a habit. So I encourage not only the kids, but the parents that you have to set that example for your kids so that they can understand why they need to be healthy, right? So it's not easy. My kids they're very active and they also like video games, but they're more active than anything else because they like football, right? So they tease me for being slow, but I try to go outside, kick the ball with them or do jumping jacks, or I play music. I like to dance. So for me, I'll play a song and we'll dance for 3 minutes in the kitchen, and that is a great place to start. Sweat, move your body, get your blood pumping. You know, let's not think of exercise as something crazy. 5 minutes is better than 0 minutes.
True. Yeah, I love to dance too. We do the dancing thing, and my boys, I've got teenage boys, they're at that stage where they want to beef up, so I just did a gym membership for them, so they go to the gym every other day or every day sometimes. It just depends on what's going on at that time. So yeah, that's good. I mean, like, so parents highly encourage you to encourage your kids to do something fun. It can be fun too, like making it fun. Like sometimes what I do, if I finish work early and my kids are home, I'm just like, let's take a walk around the block.
Yes.
Which is nice because like my 8-year-old likes to collect stuff as we go. We like finding things, picking up new things, and it's actually really nice in springtime because you start seeing the flowers blossom, watching the tulips do that. It's fun. So yeah, that's a fun activity. Colin, stop looking at me like that because that is the most fun you should do with him. He likes walking by himself because he's a fast walker. He's like thinking of everything and managing everything at that time. Do you take walks?
Is that what I'm doing?
Yeah.
I just thought I'm getting away from life. That's it. No, actually, we've been getting some questions on Facebook. I'm not sure about the question, but I'm going to get to it a little bit later. Big shouts to Colette. She's on the live, right? Yeah. So we're going to get to your question in a minute. But as we get to the serious stuff, right? Yeah. I know we started off this show being very serious, and because the diabetes is a serious thing, right? And I want to get to actually, at some point, to how Mystery got into all of this, right? Yeah. It's still great that you started off serious because that's what it is, right? We want that information. We want everybody to have that information and to be aware, especially in our communities, right? Where did you start? I know you've been you came to Canada. You enrolled in a nursing program, right?
No, so I am a graduate of a nursing program from Belize.
Yes.
And when I came on here, I was in the process of going through my nursing credentials.
Yes, that's what it. Okay.
That's okay. Which I've been able to submit all my paperwork, and I've been approved to sit my nursing exam. Yay. So the ball is in my court now to sit the exam and, put on my big girl panties. I've been very nervous. I'm not going to lie.
You nervous? Because
yes.
People, let me go. Let me just rewind for a couple of years. I met Mystery at the Wien Community Center, right? Yeah. And she was doing all these things, and she was very opinionated, and she was very excited. She said the first thing we talked about was her being, and yes, it was about her trying to get her credentials and the troubles that she was having at the time. And she was like, you know what, the getting the credentials, it's a process that's not in favor of immigrants.
Yes.
That was one of the very first things, right? And then because of that, I had to talk to other nurses that I knew, and they were saying the same thing. Mm-hmm. So first of all, congratulations on you getting where you need to get to. Yes, right? Because like I said, I've known her for a couple of years, and I know she was like, we're not getting the opportunities because to get the accreditation, it's just so stacked in against you,
Yeah.
right? So let me ask you, is it still stacked?
So
Do you feel it getting better?
right now it is better.
Yeah.
There is a temporary license that we can get for 2 years to help us better with the exam. Okay. So what happens because we're not educated here? I think not going to school here for whatever reason affects our grades sometimes when we sit the exam. So you find that a lot of internationally trained nurses have to sit the exam more than once. Okay? And then there's like that financial barrier, that like shot to your confidence, like why do I have to take it multiple times? So I think all of that has also contributed to my fears as well.
Okay.
And it's a real like confidence shaker, especially if you've been pretty well academically, and then you take an exam and you're not like you didn't get the marks that you desired, right? So right now they've been helping out a lot, and you can qualify for a temporary license just rolled out by the government. Obviously, someone has to agree to hire you under that class, and then you're able to work for 2 years and then sit the exam, which I think is a big help.
Yeah.
I am not sure if the paperwork process has improved since the last time I've been through it, but I know right now where I stand, I have the opportunity to practice and then sit the exam, which I'm really happy about.
That is a good relief,
So-
though.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's a lot. Like I've met a lot of nurses who are very happy with that,
Yeah.
and they've been able to use that in their favor. But again, I have to. I'm privileged because I was not sent back to school, and I was, convalidated to sit the exam. While others in my shoe may have to go back to school, may have to do language proficiency. Like I kind of want to, make it seem like it's butter either. But I know for me, I'm very grateful. I was not being sent back to school, which is a big plus. But I know a lot of us are sent back to school.
Yeah,
So.
I've met a few doctors who did really well. They were professional doctors in their countries, but they come here and then, like, some speak French in their country, and then that language barrier, well, French is good, but then, like, there's some who speak different languages, and then they come here and then English is not their first language, and then that's already, like, their colleagues, like, I was talking to some just asking as well, it's like they already have problems with their colleagues thinking they're not as professional because they don't know how to speak English. But in their country, you look at their ratings, they were like probably the best doctor there. So yeah, and then that piece of having to go back to school, and it's so sad because, like, if you look in the past, most doctors are driving cabs because they just don't want to go through that process. They've been a doctor in their country so long,
Well,
and
it's
then
the
now it's
finances, right? Like
and that's what I'm saying.
when
And
you
now it's
come
the
and you have
finances,
mouths
having
to
go
feed,
there.
right? So
Yeah.
you sacrifice for your family and you don't go back to school. I don't think it's because
That's
they don't
it.
really want to. I think it's expensive. Like the
Yeah.
nursing, like I was telling Colin when I first met him, I didn't feel like a nurse in my first year of
Yeah.
this. It's all about what I could afford to pay to get tested, to send my documents. Like it required money.
And that's
It
the
wasn't a
biggest
cheap. It
piece.
was not a cheap process. And then to get your documents from, like, luckily I'm just 4 hours away by plane, but my country, we're on Belizean time, right? So nobody's rushing to ship your educational work here. So I was delayed like almost an entire 6 months because my country was on holiday. So like there's a lot of barriers for us to like, so imagine if you're coming from like India or Africa, imagine how long it's gonna take for them to post your
Yeah.
educational
Yeah, if
grades,
they don't have
your
all the
course
paperwork.
outline, like
Yeah, that's
it's
why a lot
a
of
whole
people give
thing.
up. They give up. It's the financial
I've met a lot of
barrier.
people who've given up.
Yeah.
But also I want to advise anyone that's listening, do not listen to your friends' bad stories. Go
you.
get the right information, because I've also found that there's a lot of misinformation in the process.
That's true.
So don't just listen to the negative. Go make sure you know the process clearly and work your way through. Because I've met a couple of nurses, because I was a PSW before I went and did my nursing. And I've met a couple nurses from their countries who are still PSW. And, you know, they just don't even try because a friend told them, don't waste your time. Right? So don't be like that.
I feel like a subtopic here should be make sure whatever you're doing, get the right information because
Do
it's
the research.
Get the right information because we talked about it in terms of understanding diabetes, even knowing what it's about, and now we're talking about a whole different aspect of we're in the job and knowing if you're qualified, what you have to do. So if you're here, do your research.
Yes.
Get educated. Now I'm going to get back to Mystery here because we had to talk about her struggles a little bit in getting. Where did Type Diabeat It come in? Because I think I know a little bit at the start because I remember I was there at the start. So, but I want you to lay it out for us.
Okay, so growing up, I used to administer insulin to my grandmother. I have lost both my maternal and paternal grandparents to diabetes. So since I was about 8 years old, I used to give her insulin. We lived in a remote part of Belize. The nearest hospital, we were living down south, and the nearest hospital was probably like 45 minutes drive from where we lived, and we lived in the hills. And my aunt was attending school, so my dad's originally from Guinea-Bissau in Africa. So when his family came to Belize, my aunt went back to school to learn English, and I was left at home with my grandmother. And I don't know why I felt that I could do this, because my 9-year-old son could not inject me to save his life. I could guarantee you he'd probably like scream and cry and jump. And so for whatever reason, I did it. She asked me, she said, I really need this. Do you think you can help me? And I was like, sure. So I became her basically unpaid nurse, and I was giving her insulin.
At 9.
And she told me, my daughter's hands are too heavy. You do it, right?
So you were 9 years old?
Yes, and I was giving her insulin, and she chose me over my aunt because she's like, I like your hands better. They're soft. So I've been giving insulin, and then fast forward, I came to Canada as an international student. I went back home for a bit, and we did a diabetes run with my mom. I started a youth group, and I really, wanted to do more for Belize because diabetes is top 2 cause of death. And there's so many amputees, lack of education, resources, just so much happening. And I just wanted to be a part of a movement and a change for diabetics, given that it's so close to me, right? And I got started in Belize, and I modeled most of what I did in Belize based off the healthcare system here. Right? Okay. So when I came back, I started again I wanted to do relief work for Belize, right? It was very much about supporting Belize because I felt, Canada had it all perfect. The healthcare system is perfect, right? Because my perspective is coming from Belize, right?
Yeah.
So that, Type Diabeat It was all about trying to gather support for Belize. And then I got a job as a clinical educator. And I really loved that role that I had. And it opened my eyes to so much in the nursing field, right? So I got to do the clinical back end, training, orientation. I go to all the different wards, like all the different units, and I go to their meeting huddles. I do KPI, policy, just a whole nother spectrum of nursing. And I felt really lucky to, my first foot in the door, I had a job at the hospital. And of course, I wanted the diabetes nursing role, most naturally. So I started to snoop around and find out who that person was and really get involved with diabetes on the clinical level, because that's also my passion. Yeah. And during that process, I realized that I was needed here as well, right? So for years, I did not think or feel that little Mystery from Belize was needed in Canada. I did not think London needed me. I was like, there's so much of me. Like, Canada got it going on. I'm going to just sit back here and watch, And that was my first take. But that role made me realize that is so wrong. And that when we talk about diabetes care, we tend to use this cookie cutter model that is supposed to be applied to everybody. But we don't factor in the person's culture. So for instance, my friend, she had gestational diabetes. She goes to the hospital. I helped her not to develop type 2 because she was very much uncontrolled her entire pregnancy. They give you a paper and they say, here, you have to eat like that. And they send you home, okay?
Where are you going to get the money?
And then when you read that paper,
Nothing is.
you go,
Yeah, nothing is.
she's like, I don't eat this.
I don't.
So she threw the paper. And then she calls her partner and she's like, bring me this, this, and this to the hospital.
Yeah.
So she go get her African food, Caribbean food.
Yeah.
What is asparagus? You know what I'm saying? We don't eat like that.
No.
But it doesn't mean we don't have other vegetables,
Yeah.
right? So I've been having all these experiences, and diabetes is 1 in 3 in Canada.
Oh, wow.
Doesn't matter what color skin you are, is affected by the related complications, because diabetes affects your eyes, your kidneys, your nerves.
Yep.
Risk for heart disease, cholesterol. So diabetes is not a standalone. It affects many other organs in your body, right? So I realized that there's so much education and support that I could actually share with my people here, right? And, you know, it's not only my lived experience, my clinical experience, but also with culture. My grandmother was heavy on her cultural food, you know? No offense, but when she came to visit me, she's like, I don't eat like this. That is, you know? As for the other races, I need this particular type of food, right? And I was able to use all of that from growing up to going to school to be able to help and empower, you know, people that look like me to say, hey, diabetes is not a end, you know, your life is not over. You can enjoy your plantains, you can enjoy your corn tortillas, your flour tortilla, your rice and beans. You can eat these food, but we got to talk about the right portions. We got to talk about the right quantity, right? And having all this experience, I was like, you know what? We're doing work in Canada. You know, we're doing this. And, you know, I spoke to my board and we adopted a twofold mission that we wanted to also impact lives and empower our community here, specifically with type 2, because in Canada, it's not so much a lack of resources or a lack of services, it's a lack of equity. It's a lack of cultural competence. It's a lack of understanding, because healthcare is built on Caucasians, right?
Yeah.
The medical textbook, the diagnosis. I had my son wrongly diagnosed in London that he was blind.
Wow.
And that's because the light doesn't reflect the same in a black child's eye in comparison to a child with blue eyes.
Ooh.
Okay, my son's 11 now, and had the specialist not known the difference, or had the doctor been quick to prescribe my son something at a tender age of less than a year, he could have actually had eye complications.
Wow.
So these are real things that happen by no fault of anybody, just a real lack of knowledge of what diabetes can look like in other races. How do we want to engage with the material? So you go to most of these resource centers and diabetes clinics, and they'll tell you, oh yeah, you know, the black community, they're not here as much, but we're aware the numbers are high in the community.
Yeah.
And I got tired of hearing those words, and I said, well, what are we doing to make them come and access the services, right? We need to form partnerships, because I don't think we have to invent the wheel. There's a lot of phenomenal programs out there, but how do we make it fit?
And accessible.
And access to people that look like us, because access is not equity, right? It's there, but it doesn't mean that you feel it, right?
Yeah.
So I was doing a healthy snacks program with a soccer club, a local club that catered to low income and people of color. And I tell this story every time. And sorry if you heard it already, but there's this 12-year-old boy who never had a cherry tomato, lives in Canada. There's all these food banks, there's all these fancy grocery stores, and he's never had a cherry tomato. And if that doesn't make you sit back and humble and ask yourself a few questions, then I don't know what does. And that is a perfect example that access is not equity, and not because it's available everywhere means that our kids are getting that, right?
Yeah.
So a cherry tomato is something simple, we know it, but not every child in the black community has access to fresh produce, which is why we have a greenhouse. And we'll be providing free vegetables to the community, as well as cultural vegetables like kalalu, okra, you know, some of the herbs and spices that we use, some of the grains. We're trying to experiment how to grow them.
Yeah.
But we want to be able to increase that access, because not only people of color, but kids in Ontario, 12 to 18, struggle to eat enough fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, they don't like the
Statistically,
vegetables.
so.
Yeah. Wow.
you know, and this goes, I'm going to talk again about you on social media, right? Because every so often, if you pay attention to Mystery's social media, you see her with the farm.
Yes.
Right? And she's got her thing on, and you might see her with a scoop or a shovel or something, right? Why did you decide? Well, you pretty well answered why you decided to get into the farming aspect.
The farming aspect of it.
It's just, this is getting it down to the nitty gritty in the sense, and just not just being able to say, well, okay, you should do this, but you're actually engaging in the farming. How's the farming going?
Amazing, because I believe that for us to have that shift in health, we need to create the experience, right?
Yeah.
So, my thing is, if I get your son to come and plant okra, and he harvests it, and he takes it home, you have to cook it.
Mm-hmm.
Because your son planted it, right?
Yes,
Exactly.
yes.
So for us to get that movement as a community and as a family, we have to feel engaged. We have to build that experience. So again, I talk about my grandma all the time because of her. I'm here, you know, all her sacrifices and everything that she's done.
Amen.
And I believe in a holistic approach. And for you to want to change after X amount of years, change is not easy,
No.
right? My grandma would be the first to shoot down anything overly healthy. Okay, she'll be like, when I'm dead, you don't put salt in my food. But for now, I want all the salt, I want all the sugar.
I hear you.
You couldn't tell her no.
Yeah.
That was her for all her life, right?
Yeah.
So we have to target, you know, the kids to empower them. The kids come with their families, right? So if I get your son to come, I guarantee that you have to show up at least once. And once I have you there, we have these conversations casually, right?
Yes.
And food is universal. We don't have to speak the same language. I don't have to understand a word that you're saying. But food is community. And if we're able to target food and have a health spin, we have a lot to talk about over good flavors, over good tastes, which is what I'm doing right now. I have a pilot project with the Catholic School Board. I'm in a class 4 to 5, and we're looking at foods from the African diaspora. So I get the kids to smell the kalalu, touch it, interact with the five senses, and every week we do something different, from gardening to dancing to a little bit of exercise, but all based in a food that's origin is stemmed in Africa. So like today we did plantains. Someone told me I made the best beans ever, so I'm like on
Yes.
because she was not a person of color, FYI, and she's like, this is the best beans ever, and I was just like dancing in the class.
Yeah.
And I also have a child who is special need in the class, and this child was eating couscous, and apparently he never eats anything apart from what the mom sends to school. So having kids interact with the food and see a diverse face and opening up their minds, because it's world knowledge, right? So the curriculum is not just for people of color, it's for everybody, right? Because that is the representation, that's the equity, that's the act, that's the inclusivity that we actually want to see. Because I feel like we use these words casually, but we need to get the words off the paper so that our kids feel included, feel like they have access, feel like they can have equity to have that experience to succeed, right? And food is a basic needs. You know, we are talking about food insecurity is a whole nother session that we can get into. So the curriculum is something I hope to see in other schools, that because we have the capacity to run, and we talk about food and we try it. At the end of every session, they get to try it after looking at it uncooked. Older classes can physically cook. At 4 or 5, they're doing like just making the sauces, you know, minor, and we do like kitchen skills, how to read a recipe, all these very fun things with food, because that is the empowerment, because they now know what all they could eat, what they should eat. And we're always talking diabetes. Like today, you know, when we talk about the cassava, these are good starches. These are better replacement for your white flour, your rice, your potato. Cassava is your friend. It has, you know, it has a little bit of fiber and a good resistant starch. It's like green banana. Green banana, if you're diabetic, that should be like your best friend. So, you know, it's a lot of conversations around, you know, health and culture, and how do we bridge that gap, right?
And I applaud you for what you're doing because, like you say, it does start, like they say, a healthy mind, a healthy starts in the kitchen, right? So, and with the kids, if you're teaching them at an early age and incorporating it in the school system, it's actually really good because then they go home and discuss vegetables and discuss things that they could eat. And that was like with that. And just briefly, my condolences on the loss of your grandparents. I know,
That's okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I know I lost my aunt to diabetes too, but she actually had her leg amputated. It got to that extent where it was like, okay, it was so bad they had to amputate her leg. So it runs in the family. So I'm really like, okay, I need to know more about this and what leads to
Amputation
that.
is probably going to be a whole nother session because during the pandemic, it showed light on like the risk for amputation, actually the care of those with amputation, how bad it was. So like I mentioned, very non-scientifically, that diabetes affects your nerves.
Yeah.
So what happened as you get older, you stub your toe, you get an ingrown toenail, you clip it, you don't go to the doctor, it gets infected, it gets gangrene, the sepsis grows and they have to amputate you. So in my country, there's a saying that they prefer to die of even AIDS than diabetes because at least you get buried with your entire body part. So when you're diabetic, you can get chopped up. I have an uncle, he's missing a few toes. And you know, it's a struggle. When you're diabetic at a certain age, your wounds take a long time to heal. You have to look at your foot. That's why there's foot care clinic. And I believe, you know, one of the things that Type Diabeat It wants to grow is to be able to incorporate the clinical aspect. Because we need foot care nurses. We need more diabetes nurses to talk about medication regime. Because very quickly, the medication has evolved since my grandparents were alive. But our community don't have access to all the quality medications and some of even the trial that's happening. So if you look around in Canada, there's a lot of people with diabetes who are doing well, clinically speaking, right? Walking around, you know, have their sugars under control. So clinically they're well. But in our community, sometimes you find that we deteriorate faster. And we need to have, you know, we need a center whereby we're able to talk about these medication, change our medication, right? A lot of us don't even have family doctors to start off with. So where will these conversations start?
And here's the thing. Now you get to some of what we do inside Real Talk. We encourage the conversations, right? Because when we started Real Talk, we one of the first things we said was the conversations, some of the real conversations happen sometimes at the dinner table, sometimes at the domino tables, right? And they only happen in a micro setting, right? One-on-one setting, one-on-two setting, but the larger settings, no, the conversations don't happen. This is a good example because the information that was relayed today, I'm going to have to make sure this podcast gets chopped up in many pieces and replayed, just because there was so much information that you let us know, and so much information that I personally just found out that it's great in that aspect. I'm going to touch right back to when you talked about the kids, right? When you have mixed family, when I say a mixed family, I'm going to go in the sense of the parents are from the Caribbean or Africa or somewhere, but the kids are born in North America or Canada, right? You find they migrate towards North American food, right? And we don't accurately tell them why our food is good. And I'm not talking to you just about the rice. I'm going to get back to that ground provision thing, right? They don't look at ground provision as food that they should be eating because it's an old people food in that sense, and it's cultural. And so there needs to be an explanation. Yes, it's cultural, but this is why it's cultural, right? You touched on the grains and all the things that came from Africa, right? Original, and you talked about before slavery, right? There's times people try to shy away from that slavery talk because it's painful, and sometimes the theory is that it's over talked about.
And some people are like, okay, let's move on.
Let's move on.
Well,
But
it's
this
not talked about properly.
That's
and
it.
that's where we're
Or
going.
enough.
Enough,
right?
In the right setting, because
we have these bubbles that we overshadow because it might be too painful, but the reality is that we need to really talk about it.
but
right?
here we're talking about it in a food setting,
Yes,
right?
in a food setting.
And not a lot of times do you see it broken down into the nitty gritty just like that. Here's
Yes.
in a food setting, we're people that our genetics are good, right? And we're, like you said, we're ground food people,
Yeah.
right? Originally in the Caribbean, it was a ground food until rices got introduced, right? And so now it's like we have to make sure that we're passing that right information back to our kids. Hey, our original food is cultural, but more importantly than being cultural, it's the food that is actually good, and this is the reason why it's good. It can help you with this, it can help you with that, and make that relation. Because, like I said, when you get the new age blended family nowadays, it's I'm from the Caribbean and you're from Canada, and it's
Let's do a macaroni and cheese.
Yes.
And that is because, again, like you said, so when you come to Canada, you're busy.
That's it.
You're trying to secure a job. It's harder for you to pass on your knowledge because we're not in community anymore.
Yeah.
So when you go back home, that was not really your responsibility. So, like for me, my mom's a career woman. You could starve for all she worried about. Like my mom is the boss of Sky Water and Sky Juice. She's a career woman, okay?
Yeah. Yes.
My grandmother took care of indoctrinating us, right?
Yeah.
So when I came to Canada, I didn't have that community, and the task relied on me.
True.
And when we send our kids out into the world, our stories are told by somebody else.
That's it.
So then our kids feel like our food is not healthy because that's what they're told. When have you walked into a family doctor or a nutritionist and they say African diet, Caribbean diet? They're going to tell you Mediterranean, Greek, European. So what happened to us? So I find that
Keto.
whenever we talk about African or Caribbean food, it's like the
Oh my.
elephant stepped in. But if we say French food or Italian or Middle Eastern, nobody says no.
No.
But the minute you talk about our food, it becomes this elephant, this exotic elephant that we're eating, basically, right? That's what they think of us. So my idea with the curriculum was to change that narrative because we need to encourage our kids to bring their foods to school. I have friends that are Somalian. Her son takes sandwich.
Yeah.
No offense to her, I love you. But my son tried the same thing with me. He came home and he was like, Mommy, we have a problem. I think you need to stop sending me to school with the chicken and the bone. I said, when you start to pay them bills. You understand?
Yeah.
Not exactly like
No,
that.
I hear you.
But we had to work to build that confidence.
Yeah.
Okay, he comes home and he's like, Mommy, I don't have friends because they don't like coconuts. And I love coconuts. Is there a coconut tree here, son?
No.
No.
They have not traveled to where there's a coconut tree.
Exactly.
Okay?
But I think it's more than
So-
that too. But I'm glad you touched you.
You understand? So I had to really work with my kids that now we don't have that issue. But the reality is I'm fortunate to have the time to do that.
Exactly.
Not all of us that migrate here have the time to have that conversation with our kids. We just say, you know what, it's easier. Here's the sandwich.
True.
Okay? Because they feel pressured when they go to school. But now my kids come home and they're like, everyone loves the smell of my food, Mommy. And now they don't care. But we had to work to build that confidence because he was already telling me, I need to cook. I said, I don't make sandwich. No offense to sandwich eaters. But that's a snack when I was growing up. My grandma's going to make you a sandwich as a snack.
That's a snack. Yeah,
That's not your lunch. That's not your breakfast. That is a snack in my household. And I told them, I'm sorry, I don't even buy sandwich stuff. I'll buy bread, but that's not how I was raised to eat. So we have to work with our kids, and if we're able to show our kids it's okay. Like when I'm in these class, I have kids that are Latino. Our foods are very similar with the Latin community. They have a heavy African influence and Caribbean influence. The plantains, the okra, the cassava. is just in Spanish,
Yeah.
but they know it. When I talk about our foods, I have the kids from the Philippines. The kid got up, and you could see the pride in his face that he knew this food.
Yeah.
And I said, repeat yourself. And the whole class had to keep quiet, and he was able to talk about the food that came from his country that also relates to a food in Africa.
Yeah.
So the curriculum is doing wonders because we can relate. We have other, non-kids of color who have, some of these foods in their house and they know how to cook it. Or I know who's the cook at home, mom or dad. These kids talk,
Yes.
right? So it's a conversation starter because food at the end of the day is universal.
Yeah.
And we might call it X, Y, or Z in Jamaica, but we might call it something else, right, in India. But the fact remains is it's food, right? So that is the impact, that is the power, talking about the right portions, talking about health, and introducing our foods the right way to the world. Because how many of us knew that we had over 100 strains of grains in Africa, right?
No. The one thing I like to do with my kids, though, touching on kids, is I love, like, my youngest son, I will take him to the grocery store and I'll let him pick a fruit. So we try to pick new stuff. So we'll say, okay, we're going to try something new. And then he'll pick something new each time we go to the, I'm not too big on the shopping, but when I do go, we do go to the, I love the veggie aisle because I like to cook and I like different fresh fruits and vegetables and the spices. So like every time we go, he's always like, can I try that? Can I try that? And it's funny, like he wanted the pomegranate. So it's like you open it and it's the way it just opens up was exciting for him. So it's like I find it's also good, like just allow your kids to explore like that vegetable section and pick out something new. Like we even tried some, like my country though, Zimbabwe, we are more influenced by the Western British culture. So like our food is more British, and then we do our staple is like
That's the transition, though.
Yeah, that's the transition. Yeah, like I know, like honestly though, if you go to the rural areas, it's more ground stuff, right? Like the peanuts, the a whole lot of things that are
And that's the westernization I talk about. So even in Africa, it happened. Right?
It happened,
Our food
true.
was affected when they
It
came
was so
into our
affected,
country.
true.
So then they tell the world what we eat, which is a lie.
Yeah.
Americans couldn't even grow rice. They brought slaves to teach them. The women in Senegal were like the experts in growing it.
Yeah, because our staple became rice and chicken for Christmas. That was like, oh my gosh, rice and chicken, that was our special stuff. But corn for us is corn. But I liked how we grew up because we had our corn and then we had our relish, which is like you have a beef and you have a vegetable. So you have to have all three to make it a proper meal. And there's the educational part of that is really good because at least you're getting a balanced diet. A balanced diet was always everything. But yeah, everything comes from the ground. And you plant your stuff. And I love what you're doing with the garden because it's like you said, the dads, the kids, they come, they connect, and they connect on that level. And watching something grow and then taking it home and eating it is a big part. Just knowing that I planted that and now I like it. Like nobody really knows how okra grows. Right? Like I was talking to someone else who's like way older, not a kid, just saying, I've never seen okra on a plant. I just see it in the store. I don't even know what it grows like. So
okra is great for diabetes. FYI.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the other question I was gonna ask. Like if it is. Like, I hate medicine. I will tell you that right now. I don't like taking pills, popping pills. I don't like that. I prefer a holistic approach where I eat foods to combat my conditions. So what would you recommend for someone who's got, okay, let's say type 2 diabetics, which is like a common one, or type 1? What kind of foods do you recommend?
So,
vegetables
when it comes to recommendation, it's not a blanket thing. Because we have to look at what stage they are in type 2.
Yeah.
So if you have uncontrolled blood sugar, you only can have half a fruit, which is the recommendation. Because while fruits is healthy, once your blood sugars are at a certain level, you're only recommended to have half a fruit. Okay, so ideally, my recommendations would be, try to figure out what your sugar readings are, and then we have to talk about portions. So like I said, fruit is good, but if you're diabetic, one banana can send you off the chart. So in terms of friendly foods,
Yeah.
okra, okra water, soaking the okra in water does phenomenal things. Like I said, green banana, cassava leaf is harder to come by here, kalalu. So you just want healthy starches, starch-resistant fibers, and the right portions, which I couldn't recommend because it's very much based on if you're pre-diabetic, you could end up having a whole banana, and a mango, but as a diabetic, the important thing is your portions throughout the day. It's a lifestyle modification. It's not a diet. So let's say you do have a whole piece of bread in the morning. Maybe for the rest of the day, you won't have any bread, right? It's really a balancing act. And typically, that is how your health should always be, even if you're not diabetic, right? You need to balance how much carbs, how much protein. You don't have to physically read the grams. I don't subscribe to like this gram and that gram because everybody's is different. It has different requirements. So you might be able to have more carbs, not only because you walk, but just genetically.
Trying to get in my walking. Why is everybody picking up my walking? Oh man. There's so many more things that I could ask you.
Yes.
And this hour is just kind of like, it started like this. And that's, you know what? I'm so glad that I started it on that serious note, right? Yeah. We still got room for the personal. I'm going to have to get this, call this a part 2 that we got to get back to.
No problem.
But it's a great way to actually finish off by talking about the portions and our eating habits.
Yes.
So on that note, I'm going to thank Mystery for being part of Real Talk. You're coming back.
Thank you. Yes.
We're gonna call this part 2. We're gonna bring you back sometime next month. That we're gonna get back into some more things.
Sure.
Angel, our part-time host, who's gonna come back and be a full-time host at one of these days, right? Once again, thank you for being a part of Real Talk. This has been this has been another episode of Real Talk Straight Talk. You can catch us on Facebook. You can catch us on IG. This particular episode, we are going to cut up into pieces because I think there's so much information that I'd like people to know. Diabetes is one of the things, especially type 2 diabetes is one of the things that affects the Black community. So on that note, I want to thank all our sponsors once again, the Wheaton Community Center, Up Like 7 Barbershop, Paranite Bar and Grill, Rhythm Movements Community Association, like I said, out in Ottawa, Soul Kitchen Radio from Hamilton. Of course, Angel and The Fix. We got to get back to shooting at The Fix. We're going to talk about that. Of course, we're going to have another episode next week. So if there's anything you want to know, please don't be afraid to hit us up. Like I said, we are on social media. Let us know what you think. We appreciate your thoughts. We want your input. Once again, hit us up on social media, Facebook, IG. Let us know what you think. This is what we call a Fade to Black. Thank you for being a part of Real Talk, and next week.